Unaware the wife he divorced was about to seal a $10 billion deal. Husband poured dirty water on her after believing his mother's lies. What she did next crushed them both. Mark poured dirty water on a woman he thought was nobody. She stood there, silent, dripping in a designer suit he assumed she borrowed. "Get out of my house," he said. "You don't belong here anymore." His mother Eleanor nodded in approval. She never did. What Mark didn't know, the house was never his. Hannah had paid for it. What Mark didn't know, the wife he divorced wasn't the low-level office worker he thought she was. What Mark didn't know, that morning, Hannah had signed documents that would make her one of the most talked-about women in business. A $10 billion deal, 18 months of secret negotiations. A career she hid to protect his fragile pride. Eleanor knew Hannah was successful. That's exactly why she destroyed the marriage. She'd spent 3 years feeding Mark lies, hiring a mistress named Lena, staging photographs, whispering poison until Mark finally signed the divorce papers. Hannah had let them win. She'd stayed quiet. She'd walked away. But she'd also been collecting evidence. Every lie. Every payment. Every setup. And tomorrow, when her face appeared on every news channel, Mark would realize what he'd really lost. But by then, Hannah's revenge would already be in motion. What was she planning? The water was cold. It smelled like bleach and old floors, and something sour Hannah couldn't name. It soaked through her blazer, the one she'd worn to the signing that morning, the one that cost more than Mark made in a month. She felt it drip down her neck, into her collar, spreading across her skin like shame she didn't deserve. Her hands trembled, but she didn't move. She just stood there on the porch, one small cardboard box at her feet, staring at the man she used to love. Mark's face was red, twisted with something that looked like victory. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, like he'd just won a fight. Behind him, Eleanor stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, chin lifted, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She looked like a queen watching an execution. Hannah's throat burned, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. She'd cried enough during the divorce, alone in that tiny apartment she moved into 3 months ago, the one with thin walls and a leaking faucet, and a view of a brick wall. She'd cried when Mark refused to listen to her explanations. She'd cried when he handed her the divorce papers with Eleanor standing right beside him, smiling. She'd cried when she realized the man she married had chosen his mother over the truth. But she was done crying now. Mark dropped the bucket. It clattered against the concrete, loud and final. "I said, get out," he repeated, voice colder this time. Hannah bent slowly, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, and picked up the box. Inside were a few books, some old photographs, a coffee mug her father gave her before he died. Small things, meaningless things. Everything that mattered was already gone. She straightened, met Mark's eyes one last time, and saw nothing there she recognized. No kindness, no doubt. Just anger and certainty, the kind Eleanor had been feeding him for years. "This is my house," Mark said, like he needed to convince himself. Hannah almost laughed. Almost told him the truth right then. That she'd paid the down payment, covered the mortgage for 4 years while he struggled with his sales job, kept them afloat when his commissions dried up. But she didn't. She just turned and walked down the steps, her heels clicking against the wet concrete, her back straight, even though everything inside her wanted to collapse. Eleanor's voice followed her. "Good riddance," she called out. "Women like you always think you're so much better than everyone else." Hannah kept walking. She reached the black Mercedes parked at the curb, the one Mark had never asked about, and opened the door. The driver, a man named Carl who worked for her company, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes widened when he saw her soaked clothes, her dripping hair, but he didn't ask. He was trained not to. "Where to, Miss Collins?" he asked quietly. Hannah set the box on the seat beside her and pulled out her phone. 12 missed calls. 7 from her attorney Arthur. 3 from her publicist. And 2 from the CEO of Biogenesis Corp. She ignored them all and opened her messages instead. The most recent one was from Arthur, sent 10 minutes ago. "Press conference confirmed for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Are you ready?" Hannah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was she ready? Ready to stand in front of cameras and reporters and announce the biggest deal of her career? Ready to let the world see who she really was? Ready to watch Mark's face when he realized the woman he threw away was never small to begin with? She typed back 3 words. I'm ready now. Then she scrolled through her contacts and found another name. David Chen, her forensic accountant. The man who'd been quietly building a case for the last 6 months. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Hannah, he said, voice calm and professional. I saw the final documents came through. Congratulations. Thank you, she said, her voice steady even though her hands were still shaking. But I need you to do something else for me. There was a pause. What do you need? Hannah looked out the window at the house. Mark was still standing on the porch, watching her. Eleanor had a hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear. I need you to file everything, Hannah said quietly. All of it. The bank transfers Eleanor made to Lena, the hotel records, the recordings, the mortgage documents showing I paid for the house. Everything we've gathered. David's voice sharpened. When? Tonight, Hannah said. I want it submitted before the press conference tomorrow. Another pause, longer this time. Hannah, are you sure? Once we file, there's no going back. She watched Eleanor lean closer to Mark, watched him nod at whatever poison she was feeding him now, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger, not even hurt anymore. Just clarity. I'm sure, she said. The apartment was dark when Hannah walked in. She didn't turn on the lights. She just stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the cheap linoleum floor, staring at the empty space she'd called home for 3 months. It was small. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch. Nothing like the house she'd left behind. The house she'd paid for. The house Mark now thought was his. She set the cardboard box on the counter and peeled off her wet blazer. Her hands moved slowly, mechanically, like she was watching herself from somewhere far away. The suit was ruined. $3,000, custom-tailored, bought specifically for today's signing. She'd worn it because she wanted to feel powerful when she put her name on those documents. And she had felt powerful, right up until Mark poured dirty water over her head. Hannah walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was smeared, black lines running down her cheeks. Her hair hung in wet strands against her face. She looked destroyed. Exactly how Eleanor wanted her to look. But her eyes were different. They weren't broken, they were burning. She turned on the shower, as hot as it would go, and stepped under the water, still wearing her clothes. She stood there, letting the heat wash away the cold, the smell, the humiliation, until the water ran clear and her skin turned red. Then she stripped everything off, left the ruined clothes in a heap on the tile, and finally let herself feel it. The rage. It came up from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd been pushing it down for years. Not just tonight. Not just the divorce. Years of making herself smaller so Mark could feel bigger. Years of hiding promotions, downplaying raises, pretending her work didn't matter so he wouldn't feel threatened. Years of watching Eleanor plant doubt in his mind, watching him choose his mother's lies over his wife's truth, watching him pull away inch by inch until there was nothing left to hold on to. She'd told herself it was love. That protecting his pride was the same as protecting their marriage. But it wasn't love. It was fear. Fear that if she showed him who she really was, he'd leave. And he'd left anyway. Hannah stepped out of the shower and wrapped herself in a towel. Her phone was ringing in the other room. She ignored it. Instead, she walked to the small desk in the corner of her bedroom and opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness. She pulled up a folder labeled Evidence and scrolled through the files. Bank statements showing Eleanor's monthly payments to Lena. $5,000 every month for 2 years, transferred from Eleanor's account to an account in Lena's name. Hotel receipts. Eleanor had booked the rooms where Mark and Lena met, using her own credit card, then told Mark the reservations were Lena's idea. Photographs. Not the fake ones Eleanor had shown Mark. The staged pictures of Hannah with her colleague Aaron that made it look like she was having an affair. These were real photos. Time-stamped images of Eleanor meeting with Lena in cafes, in parking lots, in Eleanor's own home, planning every step of the destruction. And recordings. Hours of them. Hannah had started recording conversations with Eleanor 2 years ago when she realized what was happening. Eleanor's voice, calm and sweet, telling Mark that Hannah was distant, secretive, probably cheating. Eleanor coaching Lena on what to say, how to act, when to comfort Mark and when to push him toward divorce. Hannah had listened to these recordings so many times she had parts memorized. "He needs to believe she doesn't love him anymore," Eleanor said in one, her voice clear and cold. "Then he'll finally come back to me, where he belongs." Hannah closed the laptop and sat in the darkness. Tomorrow morning at 9, she would stand at a podium in front of 50 reporters and announce the merger. Biogenesis Corp. and Euromed Pharmaceuticals, a $10 billion deal that would bring life-saving medications to underserved communities across 3 continents. She was the lead negotiator, the architect, the person who'd spent 18 months in confidential meetings, navigating regulations, building consensus, holding everything together when it almost fell apart twice. Her name would be on every business channel by noon. By evening, she'd be on the cover of magazines. Mark would see it. He'd be sitting in that house, the one he thought he owned, probably with Lena beside him, and he'd see Hannah's face on the screen. He'd see her title, Senior Vice President of Global Strategic Partnerships. He'd see the reporters asking her questions, treating her with respect, calling her brilliant. And he'd realize he never knew her at all. But that wasn't the revenge. That was just the truth finally coming to light. The revenge was what would happen 6 hours after the press conference ended. At 3 p.m. tomorrow, David Chen would walk into a courthouse and file a civil lawsuit against Eleanor Collins for intentional interference with marriage, fraud, and emotional distress. The evidence would be attached. Every bank transfer, every recording, every lie, timestamped and documented. At the same time, Hannah's attorney Arthur would file a motion to reopen the divorce settlement. Not because Hannah wanted the house back. She didn't. But because the settlement had been based on false pretenses. Mark had claimed Hannah contributed nothing financially to the marriage. He'd claimed she made barely $40,000 a year. He'd claimed the house was purchased entirely with his income, all lies. And Hannah had let him lie because she was tired of fighting, tired of explaining, tired of defending herself to a man who'd already decided not to believe her. But now she had the mortgage documents, the bank statements, the tax returns. Proof that she'd paid 80% of their expenses for 4 years. Proof that Mark's income had been supplemented by her for their entire marriage. Arthur had told her she could take everything. The house, Mark's retirement account, restitution for financial fraud. But Hannah didn't want Mark's money. She wanted something else. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Hannah," it was Arthur, his voice rough with concern. "Where are you? Are you okay? Your driver said something happened." Hannah stared out the window at the city lights. "I'm fine," she said. "Did you get my message about filing tonight?" "I did," Arthur said carefully. "But Hannah, I need to ask you something before we do this. Are you doing this because it's right or because you're hurt?" The question hung in the air. Hannah thought about Mark's face tonight, the way he'd looked at her with disgust. She thought about Eleanor's satisfied smile. She thought about all the times she'd swallowed her anger, buried her hurt, made herself invisible. "Both," she said finally. "Does that make it wrong?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You know," he said softly, "it makes it human. I'll file everything within the hour. By morning, it'll be public record." "Thank you," Hannah whispered. She hung up and sat in the silence. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the world would see her, and Mark and Eleanor would finally understand what they'd really done. But tonight, she was still alone in a dark apartment, dripping wet, heart pounding, wondering if revenge would feel as good as she hoped it would. Or if it would just feel empty. Morning came too fast. Hannah stood in front of her closet at 6 a.m., staring at the rows of suits she'd collected over the years, the ones Mark had never seen her wear. She chose navy blue. Simple, sharp, powerful. She dressed slowly, carefully, like she was putting on armor. Her hands were steady now. The shaking from last night was gone, replaced by something colder, harder, something that felt like control. By 7:30, she was in the back of the Mercedes, riding through the city toward the Biogenesis Corp. headquarters. Carl drove in silence, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rear-view mirror to check on her. "Big day, Miss Collins," he said quietly. Hannah nodded. Yes, it is, but he had no idea how big. The press conference was set up in the main lobby, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors that echoed when you walked. When Hannah arrived, reporters were already gathering, cameras being positioned, microphones tested. She saw faces she recognized from television. Journalists who covered major corporate deals, people whose questions could make or break a company's reputation. Arthur met her at the entrance, his grey suit perfectly pressed, his expression calm, but his eyes worried. "Everything's filed," he said quietly. "It hit the system at midnight. By now, Eleanor's been served. Mark probably knows." Hannah's stomach tightened. "Good." Arthur studied her face. "There's still time to pull back from the personal filings. The press conference will be enough. Once your face is out there, once Mark sees who you really are, that might be satisfaction enough." Hannah thought about the dirty water. The way it felt, cold and humiliating, dripping down her face while Eleanor smiled. She thought about 3 years of lies. 3 years of Eleanor, whispering poison, turning the man she loved into someone who looked at her with hatred. She thought about Lena, the woman Eleanor paid to seduce her husband. The woman probably sleeping in Hannah's old bed right now. "No," Hannah said firmly. "They don't get to walk away clean." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then let's do this." At 8:55, Hannah walked to the podium. The room fell silent. Cameras turned toward her, red lights blinking. She could feel the weight of their attention, hundreds of eyes on her, waiting. The CEO of Biogenesis stood beside her, smiling, ready to introduce her to the world. But before he could speak, Hannah saw something that made her heart stop. Mark, he was standing at the back of the room, partially hidden behind a pillar. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his hands gripping a piece of paper. The lawsuit. He'd been served this morning, and somehow he'd found out about the press conference. He'd come here. Why, to stop her? To beg? To finally see the truth? Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Hannah saw something she'd never seen before in Mark's face. Fear, not anger. Not confusion. Pure, raw fear. Because he was finally starting to understand. The CEO stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today, we're announcing a historic partnership between Biogenesis Corp. And Euromed Pharmaceuticals. A $10 billion merger that will revolutionize access to life-saving medications worldwide. And I'm honored to introduce the person who made this possible, our Senior Vice President of Global Strategic Partnerships, the lead negotiator of this deal, Hannah Collins." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Hannah stepped forward, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't make herself smaller. She stood at full height, shoulders back, and looked directly into the cameras. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong. 18 months ago, we began negotiations that many said were impossible. Today, I'm proud to announce that we've succeeded. She spoke for 10 minutes about the deal, the impact, the lives that would be changed. She answered questions from reporters with precision and confidence. She smiled when they called her brilliant. She didn't shrink when they praised her. In the whole time, she felt Mark watching from the back of the room. When the press conference ended, reporters swarmed her with follow-up questions. Cameras stayed on her. But Hannah's eyes tracked Mark as he pushed through the crowd toward her. He looked broken. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, like he hadn't slept. When he finally reached her, Arthur stepped between them immediately. "Mr. Collins, this isn't the time or place." But Mark wasn't looking at Arthur. He was staring at Hannah, his eyes desperate. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice cracking. "Please. Just 5 minutes." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. And no love, no anger, just emptiness. "We have nothing to talk about," she said quietly. "You made your choice." "I didn't know," Mark whispered, and his voice broke completely. "I didn't know any of this. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what my mother did. Hannah, I swear I didn't know about the payments to Lena. I didn't know she staged the photos. I didn't know. You didn't want to know," Hannah interrupted, and her voice was colder than she'd ever heard it. "I tried to tell you. For 3 years I tried. You chose not to listen. Tears ran down Mark's face. I'm sorry. God, Hannah, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I'll testify against my mother. I'll help you with the lawsuit. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance. Hannah felt the eyes of reporters on them now, cameras turning, people recording this moment. Mark begging. Hannah unmoved. This would be tomorrow's headline. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. You can't fix this, Mark, she said softly. You can't undo what you did. You can't take back the divorce. You can't take back last night. She paused, her voice dropping even lower. You can't take back choosing your mother over me every single time it mattered. Mark's face crumpled. I love you, he whispered. I never stopped. Hannah shook her head. You loved who you thought I was. Someone small. Someone you could control. Someone who needed you. She stepped closer, her voice steady and final. But I was never that person, Mark. I was always this person. You just refused to see it. She turned to walk away, but Mark grabbed her arm. What about us? What about everything we built? Hannah looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. There was no us, she said quietly. There was me holding everything together while you let your mother tear it apart. And I'm done now. She pulled her arm free and walked away. Mark didn't follow. She could hear him crying behind her, could feel the cameras capturing every moment, but she didn't look back. Arthur caught up to her at the elevator. That was hard to watch, he said gently. Are you okay? Hannah pressed the button and waited, staring at her reflection in the polished metal doors. Ask me tomorrow, she whispered. That night, Hannah sat alone in her apartment, watching the news coverage. Her face was everywhere. Breaking, Hannah Collins, the woman behind the $10 billion Biogenesis merger. From obscurity to power, the negotiator nobody saw coming. And then the secondary stories started appearing. Lead negotiator files lawsuit against former mother-in-law for marriage interference. Eleanor Collins accused of paying mistress to seduce son's wife. The evidence was public now. Bank statements, recordings, everything. Eleanor's name was being destroyed in real time, her reputation shredded across every platform. Mark's face appeared in one clip, caught outside the house by reporters. He looked devastated. I made a terrible mistake, he said to the cameras. I believed lies about the woman I loved. I destroyed the best thing in my life. And I'll regret it forever. Hannah watched him cry on national television and felt nothing. Just emptiness where love used to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. Eleanor's attorney just called. She wants to settle. Full admission of guilt. Public apology. She'll pay whatever you want. She just wants this to stop. Hannah stared at the message for a long time. She could take everything from Eleanor. Bankrupt her. Destroy her completely. She had the power now. But as she sat there in the dark, she realized something that surprised her. She didn't want Eleanor's money. She didn't want her apology. She didn't even want her destroyed anymore. She just wanted to be free. Free from the weight of their judgment. Free from the years of making herself small. Free from the anger that had been eating her alive. She texted back 3 words. Accept the settlement. Then she put her phone down and walked to the window. The city stretched out before her, millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of people who had no idea who she was yesterday but would know her name tomorrow. She'd won. The deal was done. Her career was secure. Her revenge was complete. But standing there alone, Hannah realized winning didn't feel the way she thought it would. It didn't feel triumphant. It just felt quiet. 3 months later, Hannah stood in the living room of a new house. Not the old one. She'd let Mark keep that in the final settlement. This house was hers, truly hers, bought with her own money. Decorated the way she wanted, filled with space and light and possibility. She'd been promoted again. Executive vice president now. Her calendar was full of meetings, negotiations, opportunities. Her name carried weight. People listened when she spoke. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd hidden for so long, was finally visible. And most days it felt good. But some nights she still thought about Mark. Not the man who poured dirty water on her. The man from before. The one who used to make her laugh, who held her hand during her father's funeral, who promised to build a life with her. She wondered if that man had ever really existed, or if she'd just imagined him. She wondered if he thought about her too, if he lay awake at night replaying every moment he'd chosen his mother over his wife, counting all the ways he'd destroyed something that could have been beautiful. She'd heard through Arthur that Mark and Lena broke up, that Eleanor had moved to another state, unable to handle the shame, that Mark was in therapy, trying to understand how he'd become someone he didn't recognize. Hannah hoped he found peace. She really did. Not for his sake, for hers. Because carrying anger was exhausting, and she'd been tired for so long. She walked to her desk and opened her laptop one last time. The folder labeled Evidence was still there. She stared at it for a moment, then dragged it to the trash. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items?" the computer asked. Hannah clicked yes. The folder disappeared, and with it, the last piece of the woman she used to be, the woman who hid, the woman who shrank, the woman who let other people decide her worth. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who'd been humiliated and rose anyway, someone who'd been betrayed and chose truth over bitterness, someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger. Hannah Collins closed her laptop and looked out the window at the sun setting over the city. Tomorrow, she had another deal to close, another negotiation, another chance to do what she did best. And this time, she wouldn't hide it from anyone. Because the wife they divorced, the woman they covered in dirty water, the person they tried to destroy, she didn't just survive. She became everything they were afraid she'd be. Powerful, unstoppable, free. And that was the greatest revenge of all. If this story moved you, if Hannah's journey stirred something in your heart, don't just watch and leave. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story about people who rise when the world tries to break them. Because these stories matter. Your support matters. And the next one might be even more powerful than this. Subscribe now. You won't regret it.